Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm back with part 3 of the Ultimate Guide to the Prophetic Calendar, Solar Edition. So let's get started. So this is an amendment to my prior video where I provided evidence for the true prophetic calendar. And this is necessary if we want to have any hope of trying to identify where the rapture is going to be, or the fall of Babylon, or anything on his appointed times. So if you haven't seen the Ultimate Guide, I encourage you to watch it. In my prior video, I made the case that we must test calendars against known appointed times, which means we must identify an appointed time without reference to any calendar. One way of doing that is to compare to wonders in heaven predicted by Scripture with the calendar. In my prior comparison, I left off the Dead Sea Scroll calendar or the Enoch calendar, the solar version, and I relied upon third-party claims regarding the birth of Yahshua and the star that marked it. So it turns out that Feast of Trumpets and or the Tabernacles was on the 6th month and not the 7th month when I actually went back to Stellarium to verify. I'd like to thank someone who posted a comment that corrected that. So I've updated the table here so you can see, and I've added the Dead Sea Scroll calendar here. So we now have the birth and circumcision sign from the Star of Bethlehem documentary. Doesn't fall on any appointed times as far as I can tell. There is a wood offering, which is not in the Bible. It's only in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's technically on an appointed time on their calendar, but that's not an appointed time that aligns with a birth or anything significant. So that's basically a piece of signal that disappears from all calendars. It still leaves the full moon calendar with the majority of signals, but I do have to credit the Dead Sea Scroll calendar with having the big sign that we're looking at on October 9th for the fall of Babylon. It agrees with the full moon calendar, so there's no way to disambiguate that. They both are positive for that. We still have a majority win for the full moon. So, like I said before, all signs are somewhat subjective, so if they don't occur on any known maps, they don't help us with the particular test. All right. So if you haven't seen this sign, you need to check out the main video on my channel. Every visible planet, sun, moon, and stars are aligned precisely as described through dozens of verses in Scripture. So check that out. So by the sun, moon, and star metric, Dead Sea Scroll calendar or the Enoch calendar, since I think they have the same day, they're the number 2 calendar. But a related calendar known as the Enoch solar calendar has 364 days in the year, plus 1 or 2 extra non-days in the spring equinox, which keep it synchronized with the sun so that it doesn't drift. The extra biblical texts they quote call for a 364-day year, but apparently the spring equinox isn't counted as a day, and once every 4 years there are 2 non-days. That's the leap year. This extra non-day every 4 years is also not described directly in the text. That said, the end result is a 365.25 real calendar. It's hard to tell if they're reading things into things to make it fit with the observed reality, or if that's what the calendars actually say in the Scriptures. So, unlike lunar calendars, these solar calendars reset their weeks at the equinox each year. So that means that the weekly Sabbath doesn't drift relative to the feast days. And it means that Passover always occurs on a Tuesday, or the 3rd day of their week, since the 3rd day of their week will drift relative to the Gregorian calendar, so it won't always be Tuesday. It'll always be the 3rd day of the week, which they'll call Tuesday. So, in my previous video, I went through the problem with Passover. We know through countless scripture that he died on the 14th for Passover. He was in the tomb on unleavened bread, and he rose on the third day. And that's the 3 days. And there are over 8 verses in scripture that say he will rise on the third day. And it's the third day counting the day of his death as the first day. And that means that a Tuesday is completely incompatible. There's no way that you can get 5 days from death to resurrection. You'd have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, raised on the first day of the week. So 6 days. That's just not possible with Scripture. So I don't know how they're explaining it. I'd like to see that. It also contradicts Scripture. So by their calendar, let's read Psalms 104. He appointed the moon for seasons, and the sun knows his going down. Psalm 104:19. So by their calendar, the appointed times or feast days are set entirely by the sun and have no relationship at all to the moon. And many of the feast days are defined as a certain day of the month, which means the moon must signal the start of the month. Their logic is that the Hebrew word that translates new moon should always be translated as new month, and that the word yarek, I can't pronounce it, apologize, which refers to the actual moon. This is just no room for ambiguity given Psalm 104:19. So how can the Dead Sea Scroll calendar ignore this? Well, interestingly enough, the Dead Sea Scroll copy of Psalm 104 does not contain this particular verse. So the Essenes would have incentive not to copy that verse, given their calendar, but the Jews would have incentive to add the verse, given theirs. So you cannot just say that the Dead Sea Scrolls is older and dismiss the Septuagint and Masoretic texts. Both sides, in theory, have incentive to add or remove from the Scripture. But Jeremiah 31 says, "Thus says Yahuwah, which gives the sun for light by day, and the ordinances or rules of the moon, and the stars for a light by night." So what are the rules for? So we have Job, which says, "Can thou bring forth the Mazzaroth," which is the zodiac, "in its time? Can you guide Actuarius with his sons," which is a constellation? "Do you know the ordinances of the heavens?" Heavens here means sky, the stars. "Can you set the dominion on earth?" So it says the stars have dominion on earth. But their calendar ignores the dominion of the sun, of the moon and stars on the earth. So Job, quoting Yahuwah, clearly states the constellations have a time and that the rules of the sky have dominion on earth. So the solar-only calendars ignore all that entirely. So there's several different verses that show that they're completely out of sync with Scripture. But solar calendars do solve one of the problems that the Jewish lunar calendars combined with Saturday Sabbath have. And the lunar Sabbath calendars also solve it. But let's identify that problem. Imagine that you were at the Tower of Babel and your family was keeping the Sabbath handed down by Noah. When the languages changed and everyone scatters, part of your extended family heads east and continues to keep the Sabbath perfectly for 3,000 years. And they end up as Native Americans. Now, imagine you and the rest of your family eventually migrate west through England and then arrive at the United States. Generation after generation, you keep the count of sunsets perfectly, and you keep the Sabbath. When you arrive and you meet your long-lost cousins, you will find that those who headed east observed an extra sunset. At no point in the 3,000 years did either side of the family lose count or miss a day, but each would be keeping a different Sabbath in the United States. So this is true regardless of whether you believe in a globe or a flat earth. So imagine you could travel the speed of the sun, which is about 1.4 times the speed of sound, If you went west, then the sun would never set. And if you went east, then it would set twice as fast. So by the time you return home after traveling the path of the sun forward or reverse, notice that I am accommodating the flat earth perspective here. The sun would have passed you twice. It's easy to visualize this on a track, a high school track, as two people in the sun. And they're going, and the people are going in different directions, and the sun is going in the direction it goes at the speed that it goes. So it doesn't matter how fast or slow the people move, the one going backward will pass the sun more often than the one going forward. Think about it in terms of relative speed. If the sun is going 1,000 miles per hour when you're standing still, then when you start walking toward the sun at 3 miles an hour, the relative speed of the sun is now 997 miles per hour. And your days will seem slightly longer. And if you walk away from the sun, then the apparent speed of the sun will be 1,003 miles per hour, and your days will be slightly shorter. So this proves that a continuous weekly cycle is a tradition of men, and that it depends upon the migration path of your ancestors. Therefore, it is not universal for all people. It is a tradition by definition, because the only way to know it is to be told from your parents. As far as I'm concerned, this is incontrovertible proof that Saturday cannot be the true Sabbath, because it is impossible for two people to keep it going all the way back to Adam if their ancestors migrated in opposite directions. To resolve this, they would have to identify an international dateline from Scripture, and then they would have to have the problem with how people on the other side of the world would observe the start of the month from that location without speed of light communications. So the international dateline is modern invention in 1900s, and so there's no scripture or anything that tells us what it should be, and so if you don't know where that is, then you don't know what the true Sabbath is. All right, so let's look at how the solar calendar solved this problem. By restarting the weekly cycle, at the start of each year, these solar calendars use the sun to calibrate at the start of the week, and therefore when the Sabbath occurs. So every so often they add an extra day while waiting for the equinox to arrive after their fixed schedule. So they don't have a continuous cycle. They could have a week that goes 8 or 9 days. Some say that they wait one day. Some years they wait 1 day. Some years they wait 2 days. And the equinox of arrival time would be like a moving international dateline. So, the point on the Earth where the equinox actually arrives changes over time, and so that would be defining your dateline, and it will change over time instead of always being in the Pacific. So when two ancestors meet, and the one that has been there since the beginning of the year is the one that's on the right Sabbath for that location, and the one who arrived recently would have to switch. And if they both arrived at the same time from different directions, then they would have to wait until the start of the year in order to know, unless, of course, there was someone else there who had been there the whole time. Now, if they're moving slowly enough, say walking over many years, then they would probably be synced up before they even met, because the probability that the international dateline is going to fall right at the point where they meet is going to be relatively small. So lunar Sabbath calendars synchronize every single month, whereas solar calendars only synchronize the Sabbath once per year. In both cases, there are transition days that adjust the weekly Sabbath cycle for the particular location on Earth. So my conclusion is that solar calendars are fundamentally incompatible with the week of the cross, and they ignore many scriptures that tell us that the moon is for appointed times. This means that the true calendar must use the moon to index the Sabbath for the start of each lunar month, and Saturday Sabbath is logically impossible given different migration paths, and is entirely a tradition of man that is not synchronized or witnessed by the sun, moon, or stars. Thank you very much. Subscribe for more videos. Thank you.